Good evening. Thank you for showing up on a gorgeous fall evening, less than 2 weeks away from a momentous election and for our last live debate of the 2020 election cycle. With all the challenges 2020 has presented already, we can celebrate the genuine opportunity that our pivot to virtual programming has created to broaden our audience for these debates by thousands, counting live audience members and on-demand viewers. Good for all of you and all your friends and neighbors and your social media connections. I am Leslie Johnson, President-elect of City Club, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that most of us in North America live on stolen land. Here in the Portland region, this is the territory of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, and Clackamas, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla, the Wasco, Cowlitz, and many other indigenous people who have known the Columbia and Willamette rivers as their home for thousands of years. Together, we recognize their unbreakable connections to this land, and we honor the resilience of their ancestors, the people here now, and the hope for future generations. Today's debate is between incumbent Tobias Reed and challenger Jeff Goodman, the two candidates running for Oregon State Treasurer this November. I want to thank Samantha Ritterbush and Rebecca Tweed of the City Club Board for producing tonight's debate, and the entire program committee for working so hard to make today's event and this entire season of programming possible. City Club hosted its first debate more than 100 years ago. While a lot has changed since then, City Club continues to be an independent, nonpartisan organization committed to providing a space for people to gather and participate in lively conversations about the critical issues confronting our communities. Even today, as COVID-19 challenges our social norms, City Club continues to work toward a more open and inclusive public space for these conversations. City Club has been sustained over all these years through the generous support of our members, individual donors, foundations, nonprofits, and businesses large and small. Today, we are grateful for the collective support of all our members and donors. You help make it possible for City Club to host our fall season of forums and debates. I also want to take a moment to recognize our season sponsors, Northwest Natural and Chevron, and acknowledge our partners, Morel Inc., MERS Design, Pamplin Media, and X-Ray FM. We appreciate that they share our commitment to helping Oregon voters get informed. If City's Club work aligns with your values, I hope you'll support us as we continue to produce forums and debates, lead public policy research, and advocate for positive change. There are two ways to contribute to City Club these days. You can become a member online at pdxcityclub.org/community/membership. Or you can make a gift by texting Support City Club to 44-321. That is Support City Club, all one word, to 44321. Or you can give always via our website. Just go again to pdxcityclub.org/donate. Before we turn the screen over to John Schrod from the Pamplin Media Group, we'd like to share this brief message from Northwest Natural, one of the sponsors of tonight's debate.
Hello, I'm Catherine Williams with Northwest Natural. Thank you to City Club for hosting this forum to hear from the candidates for state treasurer. The role of treasurer in Oregon is unique and much more than just our state's chief financial planner. In fact, in challenging economic times, the role of treasurer has never been more important. Whether in its role on the state land board or providing policy guidance to help businesses large and small navigate these economic times. Northwest Natural has kept our focus on our customers and communities as we wrestle with challenges from COVID to wildfires. We are focusing our philanthropic work on organizations across our region that support those in need, including food banks, shelters and emergency kitchens, first responders, and community action partners. Lastly, leadership is also why we're proud to sponsor City Club and its fall debate series. It is leading the way on platforms that promise serious discussion on important issues and encourage civic debate. Thank you for your attendance, for City Club's efforts to bring you this program, and most importantly, for these individuals who are committed to public service in Oregon.
It is now my pleasure to welcome John Schrag, Executive Editor at the Pamplin Media Group, which includes the Portland Tribune. John is the moderator of tonight's debate.
Thank you, and welcome to City Club's debate for Oregon State Treasurer with Treasurer Tobias Reed and Challenger Jeff Goodman. Thanks to City Club and its sponsors for making this event possible. We have about an hour, and I know you're all eager to hear from the candidates, so let me outline how we'll run the debate, and then we'll jump right in. To begin, each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Once those statements have concluded, we'll move on to my questions for the candidates, which include a lightning round. A note to those at home, the City Club does not know these questions in advance, nor does it have any role in crafting them, something that will be evident when we get to the lightning round. Once that lightning round is over, the candidates will each ask one prepared question to their opponent. From there, we'll move on to the audience questions. Now, if you have a question for the candidates, you can still post them to Twitter or Facebook using the hashtag VoteOregon2020. Again, that's hashtag VoteOR2020. This fall, City Club added something to the debates that we're calling free speech passes. If a candidate would like to rebut a point made by their opponent, extend their own answer time, or clarify a response, the candidate can simply raise a free speech pass. Each candidate has 2 passes worth 30 seconds each. Candidates, if I'm distracted, as happens, and don't see you raise your pass, just yell at me, and I'll get you in there. And finally, we'll close the debate with a 2-minute statement from each candidate. Now, we flipped a coin to determine who would give their opening remarks first. And Jeff Goodman, you won the coin toss, so you can begin.
Good evening to everyone listening or watching. Let me begin by thanking City Club and Pamplin Media and John Schrag as our moderator for putting tonight's event together. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. In 2016, I came within 42,000 votes, or 2.4 percentage points, of winning the treasurer's race, despite being outspent 5-1. And that was with Chris Telfer, the independent party candidate, very popular former state senator from the Bend area, and Republican, receiving 175,000 votes. This time, in this election this year, I'm very pleased to announce the support of Chris Telfer with her 175,000 votes for my candidacy. She's 100% behind me. My candidacy has been built around 3 themes: competence, integrity, and vision. Now, competence is demonstrated by results, not simply talking about it. I have a track record of delivering. Based on the financing plan that I put together, we were able to rebuild the opera in the city like Oswego, where I live, without asking our residents for one additional dime. And based upon the financing plan that I put together, we are in the process of rebuilding City Hall Police Station, again, without asking the residents for one additional dime. Now, it's not just a matter of putting the plan together, it's a matter of informing and persuading my colleagues and the members of the community. I did that, and both plans were adopted unanimously. It's also about integrity. I'm not interested in being governor or running for any other office outside of the state of Oregon. I want to be your treasurer for 8 years. It's about vision, about being in service to all Oregonians, not simply the chosen few, or to those outside attorneys who have interest in doing business with the state of Oregon, who are funding my opponent's campaign. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to the discussion.
Treasurer Reed, your opening statement.
Thank you, John. Thanks to the City Club for bringing us together tonight. I'm excited to talk, and I appreciate my opponent being here as well. He's making me better. I ran for treasurer 4 years ago, and I'm running for re-election because I'm convinced that there is too much grandstanding and short-term thinking dominating our politics these days. I wasn't raised to be flashy, and I don't naturally seek the spotlight. In fact, I still think it's possible to do well by doing good, and that's why I choose to focus my work on the long run. When I was in the legislature, I worked hard to bring full-day kindergarten to Oregon schools, and now I'm working hard to make sure we're investing in schools, in roads, in bridges, in affordable housing, and in making it easier for Oregon families to save for their kids' college and their own retirement. Started kindergrad and baby grad to make initial deposits in college savings plans and open up the world of education after high school for Oregon kids, regardless of whether that's university, community college, trade school, or apprenticeship programs. We have to get through this crisis we're in now. There's no way around it. But as we do, we have to keep sight of our long-term vision. And I'm really proud of the fact that we've helped 75,000 Oregonians establish and fund retirement savings accounts. They've saved more than $70 million already. I see sustainability as a lot more than a buzzword. It's how we approach our bond offerings and our investment programs. And I've worked to reduce the expenses of our investment programs. By bringing some work inside, we've reduced costs by more than $500 million and added that pension fund capital to Oregon. And while the politics of PERS have caused politicians of every party to fight endless battles, no one disputes that under my leadership, the Oregon Public Employee Retirement Fund has consistently ranked as one of the top performing investment funds when compared to our peers across the country. So I'm a little different than some other politicians you might hear. I don't tend to feel the pull of a press conference or a tweet. I'd rather think about the security of good investment returns, increasing retirement account balances, and more families saving for college beyond high school. So I think this is a good summary of the steady hand we need at Treasury, and I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thanks very much.
Great. Okay, gentlemen, let's get to it. Oregon's government currently features 5 individuals who are elected to statewide posts. You have the governor, the secretary of state, the treasurer, the attorney general, and the state labor commissioner. Currently, 4 of those posts are held by women. The state treasurer, Mr. Reed, is the proverbial odd man out. What's more, in 4 of those posts, women have been elected at least twice. Again, the state treasurer's office is the lone exception. All 29 of Oregon state treasurers, as well as its 9 previous provisional and territorial treasurers, have been men. And 2020 will not change that, as all 4 candidates for the post, including the 2 with us this evening, are men. Now, this is not the case in other states. Across the country, more than a dozen women currently hold the office of state treasurer, including Deborah Goldberg of Massachusetts and Kelly Mitchell of Indiana, who head the executive committee of the National Association of State Treasurers. My first question for both of you is, does it matter that only men have held this position in Oregon? And if so, what can you, as either the 38th or the 39th man to hold the job, do about it? Treasurer Reed, we're going to start with you. You've been active with the National Association and worked with many of these talented women. What's your take on this?
In fact, I speak with Treasurer Goldberg almost every week. Good friends with Treasurer Mitchell as well. I think it does matter. And if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I think part of my ambition is to find worthy successors. This will be the last time I run for treasurer, of course. And I would like to see a woman become treasurer of Oregon. It's important to have a variety of perspectives and backgrounds that I can't bring to the office in that respect. So if I'm lucky enough to be reelected, I want to make sure that we're casting a wide net, and I want to make sure that lots of talented people, including lots of talented women who are qualified, might become interested in running for treasurer.
Mr. Goodman, is this just an oddity of numbers? After all, as I said, 4/5 of our statewide elected offices are women. Should we not worry about this, or is this something as treasurer you'd want to address?
To your question, absolutely, we should worry about this. I think that we are an outlier in the treasurer position, which hopefully in 2028, after I finish serving 2 4-year terms, we will have a woman treasurer succeeding me. But the point about having the diversity, the inclusion, the variety of perspectives, all of which help contribute to making better decisions. The evidence is very clear about that. And so I believe that, as has been said, we want to cast as wide a net as possible. We want that diversity of views, the inclusion. It gives us better decisions. I look forward to it happening in Oregon, as I said, after 2028.
All right, second question. Treasurer Reed, as Mr. Goodman alluded to in his opening statement, earlier this year, Dirk Vanderhart, one of my colleagues at Oregon Public Broadcasting, reviewed your campaign donations and found that 40% of your contributions at that point came from out-of-state law firms. I intended to update his analysis, but ran out of time. So help me out in your answer to this. If we ran the numbers today, would that ratio still hold? And more importantly, You're the person in charge in Oregon, charged with overseeing the investment and management of billions of dollars. And yet you got the job by winning a hard-fought partisan election and are hoping to do so again. So where do you draw the line between the politics involved in getting the job and the financial management you're tasked with once you're in office?
Well, I want to be really clear about something right off the top here. I don't get to decide which law firms are part of the state's roster and who gets legal work. That's the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office. Having said that, my role is to manage the investments, as you said. And part of that involves standing up for our rights as investors, looking out for the interests of beneficiaries, making sure that we are holding corporations who might be engaged in misbehavior or misrepresentation or fraud accountable. So I am proud to have the support of people who share that mission and that commitment. I think they are supporting me because they like my attitude about wanting to assert those rights and making sure that we're looking out for the interests of our beneficiaries or retirees.
Mr. Goodman, in that same article, you told Dirk that if offered the lawyer contributions that your opponent received, you'd take the money, but you'd be, quote, open and transparent about it. You get points for honesty, but none for bravery, given that such disclosures are legally required and contributions appear on the Secretary of State's website. So what's your take on the role of campaign money, how it impacts the Treasurer's office, and more generally, the push and pull of politics on this sensitive position?
Thanks for bringing the question up. That was a question that Dirk asked me several months ago, and subsequent to that, I have changed my mind, which is someone who is in a position of authority, who will listen to all viewpoints, and then potentially change your mind, and I've done that. It may be legal, but to be blunt, it stinks. It gives the appearance of the conflict of interest. You can't have it. When I become your next treasurer, if those kinds of contributions come in, I will put the check back in the mail to the organization.
Okay, let's move to the specifics of this race, which features an incumbent, Tobias Reed, who 4 years ago defeated a challenger, Jeff Goodman. In effect, Mr. Goodman, you're asking voters to fire the man they hired 4 years ago and hire the guy they rejected. The obvious question is why? Now, in a guest column we published today in the Pamplin Media Group, you offered some reason. I want to take some time to parse those out. Treasurer Reed, your opponent said in his column, which you can find on the Portland Tribune website, that you failed to speak out publicly about the impact of COVID-19 and the state economy as it was related, and offer specific ideas on how to address the impact to the economy by the virus. So what have you done in your role as treasurer to address this problem?
My role as treasurer is about delivering long-run returns, maximizing risk-adjusted returns over the long run, and using the financial tools of the state. We have been doing that. And let's not mistake tweeting and offering public pronouncements for leadership. We see how well that operates in the White House right now. What we've been doing is preparing for disruption in the market. I don't think anyone could have predicted specifically COVID, but over the last number of years, we have been preparing for a disruption by de-risking our portfolio, reallocating our portfolio in ways that emphasize uncorrelated assets, that add hedges to our allocation, and prepare us for a disruption of a variety of sorts. We've also significantly cut costs by bringing work inside of Treasury. It's added $500 million of additional pension fund capital. And we've resituated the individual account program, the defined contribution portion of our portfolio, so that it's in a suite of target date funds that protects individual retirees better, and it protects the fund as a whole. So my opponent might want me to engage in ideological positions, but I am focused on the core mission of Treasury. I feel very good about that, and I want to continue doing it.
All right, Mr. Goodman, let's stick with the core mission of the Treasury and stay on topic with a slightly different question. From your viewpoint, what lessons about Oregon's economy have we or should we learn from the pandemic and the rapid onset recession that it caused? Is Oregon as resilient economically as we used to believe or as it should be? And what would you as treasurer do about it?
Certainly. Let me address also the financial and the ideological. Finance is not an ideological function. Finance is bringing competence to bear on the challenges at hand. It is not an ideological, it is a competence question. With respect to, is Oregon better off than or good as we could be? No, we're not. And we are going to be facing a very difficult next couple of years. As Josh Lerner in the Office of Economic Analysis has pointed out, the reverberations from the recession that we are going through will not be felt for the next couple of years. That's why you're going to need someone in the Treasurer's office who understands about the ranking of priorities of infrastructure projects, something which is not currently being done. It's something that I'm used to doing, and I have brought a track record of that when I was serving before in elected office. You want to have these basic tools of financial analysis. I also believe that I'm not doing something by tweeting. You provide solid, substantive financial analysis on what to do. I have a long track record of that. Mr. Reed's pronouncements on COVID and otherwise are, we'll get through this, or don't worry, the markets will go back up. That's true. We will get through this, but thanks to the resilience of the people of the state of Oregon, and markets do go back up. But those are platitudes. Those are not specific actions to offer what to do going forward. That's something I have a long track record of delivering on, and I will do so as your next treasurer.
That the Oregon Treasurer should attend meetings of the Oregon's Pension Board, be actively involved in the conversations about how to fund the retirement of state's public employees, and speak out more forcefully about the growing unfunded liability. Why do you think the Treasurer himself, or maybe someday herself, should get involved in PERS, and how would you approach that task?
You were silent on the first. Was that a question to me or to Mr. Reed?
Sorry, yes, that's a question for you.
Thank you.
So how would the Treasurer personally get involved with the PERS debate?
Certainly. Number one, my opponent likes to portray himself and has portrayed himself as the financial navigator for the state. The PERS challenge that we have, both the assets and the liability, that which we owe, is the single biggest dollar impact to our state. You cannot simply walk away from it. And it was interesting enough to Mr. Tobias Reed that when he was campaigning in 2016, he managed to come to a couple of meetings. He hadn't ever been there before. And the subsequent 4 years, he is not yet to be seen. You cannot look at the financial situation of the state without addressing PERS and the challenges it brings. One of the plans that I have for bringing forward is to bring people together inclusively, management, unions, school people, actuaries, accountants, attorneys, everyday citizens, have them go through a course of action, presenting all of the historical information, understanding how we got to where we got, and then dividing them up into a couple of teams and saying, okay, let's come back and bring some recommendations forward. And then as state treasurer, taking the lead, presenting that to the legislature, because I would have legislatures involved in that ongoing discussions as to what can we do. The liability, while Mr. Reed has been in office, whether it's as state representative or as treasurer, has gone, unfunded liability has gone from $2 billion to likely at the end of this year to be $30 billion. It is not something that you can remain silent on. You need to offer constructive thoughts about it, and I will.
Treasurer Reed, is he right? Should the treasurer be more out front on the PERS issue? I mean, what can you do to address this growing problem in the state?
Well, Mr. Goodman, if Mr. Goodman is going to give me credit for the great financial crisis that happened in the 2008-2010 range, he's given me more credit than I think I deserve. The treasurer is not a member of the PERS board, and in fact, if you go around the country, if you talk to credit rating agencies, one of our strengths as a structure is the fact that we've separated the assets from the liabilities. That is a real advantage for Oregon, and as a result, I think it is key for us to keep those separate. My job as treasurer is generating returns. That's what we do, and I think we risk making the problem worse if we get distracted from that mission at Treasury. We have a top-notch team that I'm very proud of having put together. We're national leaders in all kinds of aspects of this work. And when we generate $1 from investment returns, it's $1 that doesn't have to come from elsewhere in the budget. So I feel like my opponent is criticizing me for not trying to step into other people's jobs. That's fine. I know that he has to sort of, create a moment for himself here. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on the mission of being treasurer, generating returns over the long run, and making Oregon a better position in the future.
Mr. Goodman, you want to respond?
I do. Thank you. Mr. Reed is expecting the people of Oregon to bail out everything because he's been asleep at the navigational wheel, which he has proclaimed himself to be the financial navigator for the state. It's hard to know which Mr. Reed is going to show up, the financial navigator, which he proclaims himself, or the one who says, it's not my job. It's sort of like being the navigator on the Titanic saying, there is nothing in my job description about reporting icebergs. The iceberg is out there. The chief financial officer, chief navigator, financial navigator of the state needs to address it. I will.
All right. Next question. Treasurer Reed, last November, you came under criticism from a fellow Democrat, not a Republican challenger. U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley had some issues with specific investments PERS had in 2 private prison companies whose facilities had been used to detain immigrants. Now, I don't want to get into the specifics of this unless you want to, but I'm more interested in returning to this topic of how do you balance the desire to get a good return on an investment for the state versus what some people would say the social values of the state should be. How do you balance that?
It's a good question. And there are examples, this is one, where my values as an individual person don't line up with our obligations to retirees. But the obligations to retirees have to come first every time. We invest on behalf of hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who have a variety of political views. So we cannot inject our own personal political views into those decisions. The good news is that in many cases, I might even say most cases, if we think about returns on a sufficiently long time frame, our values end up lining up with those fiduciary obligations. This is a place where it's particularly challenging, but we, like anyone else who is invested through mutual funds, we have exposure to a lot of things, some of which we don't like, many of which we don't actively choose. That's the case in this particular issue. We can also be active investors, as we've talked about before in other contexts, and try to influence the direction of those companies. So this is not the only example of where those obligations and aspirations come into conflict, but we have to be really clear that our obligation, our loyalty, is to our beneficiaries.
Mr. Goodman, what's your take on both the specifics of this investment that Senator Merkley highlighted, but also the broader idea that the Oregon Treasurer should guide investments so that they align with Oregonian values? Do you have a different approach than the incumbent?
There is a balance between the two, and hopefully over time those two come into alignment. First and foremost are the responsibilities that you have to all of the participants in the PERS system, where the goal is very clear: to provide the right retirement system, to get the right person, the right time, and the right job. But there are times when you might want to, going forward, going forward by establishing certain criteria on the investments. For example, one that's brought up here by Senator Merkley, by saying it is so fundamental to the function of government by having private prisons that's not something we want to contract out. And therefore, when we are looking for additional investment dollars to be placed and we're putting out the bids for the investment advisor to look at it, that's something that can be built in. It is a first function of government to provide liberty. And therefore, it's the same first function of government to take away that liberty. Is that something that we want to give up strictly in the pursuit of the dollars? It's a very careful path that has to be trod, that you go down, but it's something on a go-forward basis needs to be looked at on an ongoing, regular basis.
All right, I'm going to shift topics a little bit here. A powerful new voice has recently emerged in Oregon. Reimagine Oregon is a group of Black leaders who gathered this summer to make wide-ranging list of equity demands, from policing to education to housing. They immediately garnered support at the city, county, and state level. Question for both of you: how could the Treasurer's Office be a better ally for Reimagine Oregon and for all African Americans living in the state? And what 2 or 3 policies would most dramatically address any of the myriad inequities that people of color experience in Oregon? Mr. Goodman, you first.
Thank you. I've been very pleased with the support and the endorsements that I've received from across the spectrum within people of color and people of all political viewpoints: Democrat, Republican, Independent, non-affiliated. As another example, I received the endorsement of Hector Hinojosa, co-founder of the Virginia Garcia Medical Clinic and would be delighted to get his endorsement. I've also learned on the policies, and the learning comes from just coming and listening. For the last several years, I've been attending services at Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church about once a month. I can assure you, when you're a 6'5", 60-plus-year-old white guy walking into a primarily African-American church, there is no hiding. But you do it by showing up on a regular basis and listening, not simply showing up once every 4 years and waving your hand and saying, vote for me. In terms of the specific policies, we have a great example coming forward with what's being looked at with the reworking of the freeway and the interchange at the Rose Quarter. There are two different visions out there right now. One is, I'll call the ODOT vision, and one is called the Albina vision. The dollars need to be examined carefully. That's something that the Treasurer's Office can add some added value to see how can we accomplish the vision and yet still get the biggest bang for the buck with the dollars that we have. And that's something that a treasurer should do, being able to rank the infrastructure project, to give advice to the legislature and the governor. They don't have to take it, but that advice should be given.
Treasurer Reed, how would you approach this?
I'll point to two short-term or immediate effects and one longer one. Oregon Saves is a really important tool that is delivering benefits to people already. You look at the numbers across the country and across Oregon, half of people who are working don't have a way to save for their retirement without Oregon Saves at work. So we're 3 years in, we have 75,000 people. The people who don't have that access are disproportionately people of color and women. And so giving those people an asset and access to a savings program has a huge impact. We also set them up as Roth IRAs, which allows them to be used as emergency funds. And we're seeing that as a specific benefit of the program in its early days. That's a direct and immediate benefit. We've also remade the way the college savings plan works because it has not been serving all Oregonians. People who use it have historically been disproportionately affluent white folks from metro areas. And by changing the tax incentive to a refundable tax credit, we're making that accessible to people at every income level and in every demographic corner of the state. In the longer term, we made specific statements in our investment beliefs about the value, the accretive value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're hard at work at integrating those factors into our investment making processes.
All right, as you've both alluded to, Oregon is increasingly a demographically diverse state, and it's always been geographically enormous. Yet the Oregon State Land Board has just 3 members: the governor, the attorney general, and the state treasurer, all of whom currently are Secretary of State. Thank you. All of whom currently are from the Tri-County area. That fact wouldn't change if Mr. Goodman is elected. So land use is complicated stuff that impacts the lives of all Oregonians. Should the land board be enlarged to ensure better geographic representation? And if so, how would the new members be selected? Treasurer Reed, you sit on the land board. Let's start with you. Are you comfortable with the current makeup of the land board? And philosophically, what is your goal? What is your view about balancing the needs of preservation versus maximizing income for public schools?
The small number of members certainly presents some challenges at times, but it's in the Constitution, and I think changing it would require a pretty thoughtful conversation about how that might be accomplished. As to the task, I think it is important to recognize our obligation to generate returns for the Common School Fund and to treat each asset as the unique asset that it is. There's no better example of that in the Elliott State Forest and the challenging circumstances that we confronted there. I entered that conversation kind of midstream. The previous land board had begun a process to sell that forest in order to generate returns for the Common School Fund. And it came, in great tension with the public's desire to maintain that forest in public ownership and meet their obligations. So I took a really active leadership role and tried to craft a new path. We're not done with that yet, but I'm really excited about the path we've forged that may well see the Elliott Forest become a research forest at Oregon State University in a way that allows us to meet our obligations to the Common School Fund and create future foresters and carve a path for Oregon to manage sustainable forestry, to address climate change, and do all sorts of other interesting things. That, I think, is emblematic of the approach that we need in the land board, that even when it's difficult, even when it seems like there's no path, to be collaborative and creative and meet our competing obligations.
So, Mr. Goodman, what's your view both of the structure of the land board and also this push and pull between preservation of lands versus maximizing revenue?
Certainly. In this case, I've been well ahead of the curve. In 2016, I advocated, while acknowledging the constitutional challenge, of increasing the size of the state land board from 3 to 5 or more members. And again, that's a tough road to go down, the constitutional change. But right now, with only 3 members, if I, as your next treasurer, wanted to call up Governor Brown and say, hey, let's get together for a cup of coffee to talk over this, we can't do that, nor should we be able to do that in the current framework, because it would have to be declared a public meeting. So expanding the numbers of members on the land board is absolutely something I would want to try and accomplish during my time as treasurer. What that specific forum would look like, should it be other elected officials? Should it be at-large officials with a designation from a geographic area? 1, 2, 3, however many it should be. That's a conversation I am very much looking forward to participating in, indeed even leading. But the size of the board should be increased so we can have more of the conversations to get an even better result than what we're getting. The State Land Board also, over the years, is what I'll call a round peg into which a round hole into which a lot of square pegs are trying to be pushed into. And I think it is also time to re-examine what is the core function of the State Land Board, to see, with all the things we've tried to cram into it, to have it be responsible for, to change what it's doing, bring it up into the 21st century, and be prepared for the 22nd century.
Okay, we're gonna follow your path and gonna paddle into the weeds here a bit, Mr. Goodman. Don't worry, it'll be a short trip. The State Land Board has the power to determine the navigability. I've had to practice that word all day. Navigability of rivers and lakes in the state. And now a navigable waterway allows the public to recreate on the water and access the lake or riverbed and banks, just as our historic beach bill gives public access to the use of our incredible Oregon coast. Mr. Goodman, we're going to start with you because you served on the Lake Oswego City Council, which has a very keen interest in this topic. Here's the question. Is the land board the best body to determine which rivers should be accessible to the public? And specifically, what is your position on the public's right to access Oswego Lake, which currently is not defined as navigable and therefore remains essentially a giant private playground for Oregon's most wealthy and influential families?
Should the State Land Board be responsible for determining navigability with its present structure? No. I think I speak with complete confidence that neither Mr. Reed, Treasurer Reed, Governor Brown, or our Secretary of State, Bev Clarno, bring a great deal of knowledge to bear on navigability issues. So as presently structured, no, the State Land Board should not be the group that should be deciding that. You want to have some additional expertise of people serving on a board who will be making those decisions. The staff can be developed to have it, and we have the staff work available. So, but the State Land Board members, no, I would change the composition, again, as part of the reference to the conversation that I made. With respect to the Lake Oswego becoming a public body versus being a private lake, as you know, that's a body that's a decision currently working its way through the courts. There have been really good arguments on both sides. When I had the vote on the question, when I was serving on the city council, the question was about the ability of the city to regulate parks and recreational time and the kind of programming that could be done. It was not addressed to the issue of navigability. So I don't have this in the background to be able to fully answer that question. And there's one thing I don't like doing is trying to answer questions where I'm not up to speed on that particular issue. I'm aware of it, but I don't have all the detail to make an informed decision, which is what I think that you would want.
All right, Treasurer Reed, whether you want to wade into Lake Oswego is up to you. But on the broader topic, what's your take on this role? And I guess you can go to Mr. Goodman's other comment, which is that there are a lot of tasks assigned to the land board that maybe could fall to someone else. Does that have merit to it from what you see?
I think it does. I would say that there are, the the capabilities of the governor, the secretary of state, and the treasurer to weigh in on broad principles and processes without having to say this specific river versus that specific river, to identify the characteristics and the mechanisms to determine that is something that the land board could do. But I think it is also something that that bears further consideration, because we haven't been making a lot of progress on that. It has not come up as a specific topic during my time on the land board.
Okay, we are going to jump to the lightning round, and I see that we have a few fairly weighty questions from the audience, so we're going to lighten it up here. So, Mr. Reed, you currently hold the position of state treasurer, and Mr. Goodman, you want the job of state treasurer, but what do the two of you know about the first man who served as our nation's first treasurer? Yes, I'm talking about U.S. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. As I hope you both know, 5 years ago, this relatively obscure $10 founding father was turned into a pop culture icon through the incredible genius of Lin-Manuel Miranda. So I have 3 questions that will be easy for anyone even mildly obsessed with the musical Hamilton. Number 1, both of you have something in common with Alexander Hamilton in that all 3 of you excelled in academics and went to some fairly prestigious schools. Hamilton applied to the College of New Jersey, which would later be known as Princeton, but didn't attend because they wouldn't let him take as many courses as he wanted. In the musical, the young Hamilton says this conflict resulted in him coming to blows with what college official? Mr. Goodman, do you know?
Bursar.
Oh, Mr. Reed jumps in, buzzed round. He's
sorry.
He wins the round. That's fine.
I agree with the answer.
You agree with the answer? Yes, it was the bursar, though Mr. Miranda did admit that he made this up simply so that he could have Alexander Hamilton trying to impress Aaron Burr rhyme Burr, sir with bursar. Okay, number 2. Even if you didn't listen to the soundtrack 16 to 20 times, not that I have, you should be able to get this one if you know your history. 2 years
now,
after
let me just ask, are you asking a specific person so I don't inadvertently jump the queue?
I kind of like this jump in. So whoever gets it, this is the speed round. Okay. 2 years after leaving the post of Treasury Secretary, Hamilton feared he would be publicly accused of corruption in office, and in an odd bit of self-defense, admitted to a different transgression. What was it?
Adultery.
Oh, tie. They both get it. Yes, Hamilton defended the charge of corruption by explaining that the questionable money that had been disclosed was in fact to keep secret his affair with Maria Reynolds, therefore putting himself at the head of the nation's first sex scandal. All right, final question. According to Miranda's musical and multiple Hamilton biographies, Martha Washington named what pet after her husband's right-hand man?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Reed again. Mr. Reed gets it. Legend and lyric, if not history, have it that Martha picked Hamilton's name for her tomcat, a tribute of sorts to his reputation with the ladies. All right, now we're back to serious
question. I highly recommend all of your viewers listening today, if they have not read Ron Chernow's marvelous biography of Alexander Hamilton, which was the basis of the wonderful play, I urge them to go out, buy the book, or go online and download it.
It is great. All right. With that, we now return to our regularly scheduled program, which calls for each of the candidates to ask their opponent a question. Mr. Goodman, let's start with you.
Thank you. This is a challenge in real time. Lynn County, along with several other counties, have sued the state of Oregon for the underpayment of revenues due to them from the old Oregon and California lands. So far, Oregon has lost the lawsuit. It is $1 billion in change that Oregon will have to pay if the lawsuit ultimately succeeds. My question to Mr. Reed is, what is your plan on repaying the $1 billion in change to the various counties?
It would be, I think, imprudent to make plans based on an uncertainty. I'm aware of the suit. I'm aware of the state's appeal of that suit and their confidence in prevailing in their appeal. We have substantial liquidity in a variety of places, and we'll confront that when it's necessary.
All right, Mr. Goodman is using his final free speech pass.
Thank you. Here is what I would do with respect to paying if the state loses, is number one, apply the basic tools of financial analysis as you go through the state's balance sheet. Number two, put an immediate freeze, subject to all the usual qualifications, on any additional capital projects, infrastructure projects. Number three, put a freeze on any additional issuance of debt. And number four, look at the potential for transferring, subject to environmental standards, some of the lands back to the counties to be able to mitigate the dollars.
All right, thank you. Treasurer Reed, your question for Mr. Goodman.
Sure. Jeff, just this week you spoke at a Trump victory rally. So my question for you is how you can support a man who's completely failed us throughout the COVID pandemic, costing lives and jobs, a man who attacks our leading scientists, excuses white supremacists, and even questions whether climate change is real. And so I want to know how you can support a guy like that. And if you don't, why you would appear at a rally giving us reason to question whether you do.
For the same reasons that I also appeared at Biden victory rallies, because I am a believer in representing of all Oregonians. I support the policies, whether it is President Biden or President Trump, and the laws passed by Congress. If they benefit Oregon and the Oregon Treasurer's Office, I'll be supportive. If they're in opposition to what benefits Oregon and the Treasurer's Office, I'll be opposed. And the counter to that is back in 2017, Mr. Reed, Congress and the President passed a law which benefited, the federal tax law, which benefited Oregon to the tune of $1 billion of additional revenue, which was not anticipated. At that time, you should have been out front advocating for using those dollars, which was found money, to go toward the unfunded liability of PERS. It wouldn't have impacted any of the other programs because those dollars were already set. You were silent. That's not something which is acceptable in the Treasurer's Office. I will not be silent. I'll speak up.
Okay, we're almost ready to hear questions from our audience. Participants have already submitted some great questions in advance by emailing questions@pdxcityclub.org. If you haven't got it in, it's not too late yet. Tweet your question or post it to Facebook on the City Club page using the hashtag VoteOR2020. Again, hashtag VoteOR2020. We're now going to take a moment to collect those questions and recognize our sponsors.
It's only human to pursue the elusive, while also capturing the possibilities, even something like CO2. Over the last decade, Chevron has spent over $1 billion on carbon capture projects and is investing in startup companies working to transform carbon into new forms of energy.
All right, it's now time for those audience questions. The first question I have is for both of you. Question is, global warming is here. It's no longer a future threat. What changes does Oregon need to see in its investment portfolio over the next 5 years, not the next 25 years, to best ride out the troubles yet to come? Mr. Reed, that's right there. What are you doing about this?
We've made a really specific statement in our investment beliefs, which is the equivalent of sort of the Constitution in our investment world, about the importance of what are known as environmental, social, and governance factors. I hired the first investment officer whose exclusive focus is on those factors. But it's really important to do this in a diligent and deliberate way because they represent new areas of quantitative analysis. We have to make sure that we're doing that in a way that contributes to better returns and decreased risk. We have to be careful about that in order to build something that's going to outlast any individual sort of crisis. And we have doubled our investments in renewable and clean energy during my term. We want to continue in that direction and make sure that we have a comprehensive approach to bringing those risk factors into our decision-making processes.
Mr. Goodman? your response?
Certainly. Here are three specific things that could be done that I would initiate that have not been done in the last 4 years. And number one, whenever the state issues debt, they have a bond prospectus that goes out. It has a risk factor section. It is not required, but we should be doing it, including a factor the risk factor that describes the impact of climate change on our state and to the state's economy. That hasn't been done. It's not required. It should be done, and I will look forward to doing that. Number two is when the state does issue debt, there are opportunities and examples where it's been done elsewhere in the world where you can link the cost of the debt, the interest rate, to meeting certain carbon metrics. That way you link the financial and the environmental issues as one. Number three, when travel begins again, and somebody in the treasurer's office travels somewhere, the opportunity to purchase carbon credits and have those credits go directly to industries, companies, farms, and tree forests here in Oregon becomes a win-win all the way around.
All right, our second audience question is about higher education. In July, the Oregon Treasury helped 8 Oregon universities refinance previously issued GO bonds, general obligation bonds, at lower interest rates. Refunding these bonds will yield more than $52 million in net present value savings to the universities and another $18 million to the state's general fund over time. That's great news. But then again, the state of our universities, even before COVID disrupted campus life, was pretty precarious. Have we over-leveraged investments on our Oregon universities given the lack of students and their uncertain future? Mr. Goodman, thoughts on that?
No, we have not over-leveraged, but this is another example where Mr. Reed runs toward the easy issues. Refinancing debt at a lower interest rate is what I'll call a no-brainer. You do that automatically. But on the tough issues, where we don't have the resources to give to our universities, which are needed, so we have the educated workforce, which will help us thrive in the 21st century, by not addressing the challenges of PERS, you take away money from other areas. This is something which needs to be done. Mr. Reed chooses to run away from these tough issues. I won't. We need to have the educated workforce going forward, and you need to be able to fund it. You do that by having a careful analysis and develop new programs within PERS so you have the right employees and free up the dollars to go to our university system and our K through 12 educational system.
Mr. Reed?
What I heard in that answer was a lot of non-specifics about PERS. I think I may have figured out the solution for PERS. It might be to levy a tax on poorly developed secret PERS plans. We'll have to take that up at another time. The Higher Education Coordinating Commission issued a really interesting report. I can't remember the specific date, but the point that they made in their analysis is that given the demographics and the changing nature of higher education, we probably don't need additional capacity, physical capacity in our institutions of higher education. Rather, we may need to reconfigure and modernize how those physical assets look and how they work. So I think at a time like this, when interest rates are very low and unemployment and need is very high, we can do a lot of good by getting after the deferred maintenance and updating work that needs to be done. But at least according to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the capacity is not the issue.
All right, not surprisingly, we have another question related to the virus. Crystal ball time. You're not economists, but the Treasurer hires economists. When does the state and federal budget come out from the weight of the COVID-19 economic downturn? Treasurer Reed, what does your gut tell you, or more than your gut tell you?
You probably remember the famous story about Harry Truman wishing for a one-handed economist because he observed that they were always saying, on the other hand. I'm going to try to avoid that, but I want to be humble enough to say that I don't know, and I don't think anyone really does. When I'm talking to businesses around the state, what I'm struck by is a level of anxiety in the number of businesses, big and small, that are just trying to stay afloat and to keep their employees on board. I think it's tempting to try to apply the same tools and analysis that we do to most recessions, when in fact this may not be an ordinary recession. This might be a generational restructuring. So I think we have to be humble enough and cautious enough to recognize that things we've counted on before may not continue. It's incredibly important for us to prepare ourselves to adjust to that new reality and not think that we're going to know we're through this too soon.
Mr. Goodman, you have said that you're actually more qualified than the incumbent for this job. So are you going to take a swing at this? When do we get out of this economic downturn?
I'm glad that you've acknowledged that I am more qualified for the job. That's pleasing to hear. With respect to when we are going to come out of this, I do agree, though, with Mr. Reed. To offer a prediction of that, the only guarantee about it is it's likely to be wrong. But I think that as we plan and we think about it, we can't simply say we're going to get through it. We have to develop specific plans as to how we're going to get through it, and we should assume the worst case. Then if it doesn't happen, we can be pleasantly surprised.
Okay. Ashley Henry, a City Club member, has a very specific question, and it's slightly different for each of you. Mr. Goodman, the first part is to you. I was surprised to read your recent op-ed critiquing the Oregon Growth Board for issuing loans and grants targeting underrepresented entrepreneurs who you pointed out, quote, apparently are unable to obtain loans elsewhere, likely for good reason. Are you aware of reporting by the Portland Business Journal about how systemic racism has resulted in virtually no bank lending to Black-owned businesses in Oregon? How would you leverage the power of the state to create economic opportunity for communities of color?
Given one example with the work in the Albina vision versus the Oregon Department of Transportation vision for what happens in the Rose Quarter. There is no question that there has been a systemic problem, challenge, would use whatever words that you like, with what has happened in Portland and elsewhere in a number of places around our country. And that needs to be acknowledged. And the discussions that we are having, not only here in Portland, in Oregon, and throughout the country, will make us better in the long term. Again, bringing as many different peoples together. But with respect to the specifics of what the Treasurer's Office can do, I've suggested one, being able to bring forward and provide the analysis as to why it shows we're going to get good returns on the dollars that the state is willing to spend. Those are the kind of questions and answers that need to be examined on an ongoing basis. And again, the results are very clear. By having a broad base of people investing in a variety of areas, you get better returns overall with the same risk profile. That's a course that we have to continue to go.
Okay, a similar detailed question for Treasurer Reed. As you know, the Oregon Treasurer sits on the Oregon Growth Board. What's your position on the role of the state improving access to capital for underserved populations and the creation of residential capital for entrepreneurs? And specifically, are you able to speak as to whether the Oregon Growth Board's investment in venture funds makes sense for Oregon's economy?
It does, and we should be doing more of it. My only complaint about the Growth Board is that it is small. We should be able to do more of that. The challenge is that it is so limited. We've done, I think, good work in the Growth Board in nurturing resident venture capital and attracting other venture funds to Oregon to see the deals and the entrepreneurs and the ideas that are emerging here. It plays an important role in bringing the entrepreneurs and the ideas that come from our universities and all kinds of other sources to market in a way that builds on the competitive advantages Oregon has. In the long run, the things that make a difference for a state's economy are investments in education, in innovation, and infrastructure. And the Growth Board plays a really important role in addressing that innovation ecosystem in Oregon, and I'd like to see more of it.
Okay, our final audience question, as you might suspect from the City Club crowd, is very specific. Here we go. Les Schwab is an important Oregon-based company that is going to be sold to a private equity firm, Meritage. Meritage, in turn, is controlled by one of the largest hedge fund managers, Jim Simmons of Renaissance Technologies, who specializes in moving companies to tax havens to eliminate taxes. Why doesn't Oregon PERS consider investing in Les Schwab directly, perhaps via its real estate portfolio? That might allow the heirs to meet their financial goals, help the company stay independent and based in Oregon. It is these mergers that are resulting in a giant loss of significant tax revenues to the state and local governments. Treasurer Reed, is this even something the Oregon State Treasurer's Office should be getting into?
I don't think so. This gets to a really fundamental philosophical question about what the appropriate model is for us. On one extreme, you have the Yale model, in which every bit of investment work is outsourced. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Canadian model, in which everything is insourced. We operate much more of a hybrid, and historically, we do not make direct investments. We invest in managers who invest in companies. There's reason to be concerned about exposure to idiosyncratic risk. There's reason to be suspicious of the specific expertise about individual deals. We are much more a global investor over the long run. And while it's, I hope that Les Schwab does not exit the state. That's not a role that the Treasury should be taking on, because our obligation is to beneficiaries. There might be a role for the state in another format, but not as an investor that's seeking returns as opposed to other laudable goals.
Mr. Goodman, is this the kind of issue, a specific company, a specific path forward that you think the Treasurer should get involved in and show leadership, or is this something that really is off limits?
I agree in this particular case with Mr. Reed's response. This is not something that the Oregon Treasurer through the investment office wants to get engaged in. But I would also point out that one of the merits with respect to Les Schwab and having the company get sold is going to be a great loss, because it provided a lot of voluntary charitable leadership, not only in Prineville, in Bend, but throughout the state. But Les Schwab, in his wonderful vision, had ownership in Les Schwab spread widely and deeply to many, if not all, of the employees in Les Schwab. They are going to be receiving windfalls, if you will, for the sale of the company. That's money that they can then use, whether it's to fund their children's education, whether it's to invest in a business that might become the next Les Schwab. That is one of the merits, one of the very positive things about the structure that Les Schwab put in place. It's also one of the great things that can happen about new businesses being started, so we have the opportunity to see what is the next Les Schwab.
Okay, that concludes the questions from the audience. City Club questions are unlike any other audience questions, and they certainly were so again tonight. Do appreciate the specificity that they had and the differences and similarities they revealed. So it's now time for closing statements, and since we started the evening with Mr. Goodman, we're going to begin with Treasurer Reed. Please give us your closing statement.
Thanks again, John, for an interesting and stimulating conversation tonight, and to all the City Club members for participating. Treasurer is not a job that is top of mind for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people know about it or care about it, excepting, of course, City Club members. But it is, I think, really critical to have someone doing the job who's diligent, who's clear about our state's values, and who understands the advantage of being an active and significant investor in the marketplace. We are thoughtful about our investment program. By bringing talent inside Treasury, we've added $500 million to our pension fund capital. We're protecting Oregonians' access to retirement. Oregon Saves has already helped 75,000 people save $70 million for their retirement. And we're investing in kids' education through the College Savings Plan, making it more accessible to low and middle income families. We're leveraging our influence in the marketplace, being serious and proactive on environmental, social, and governance factors. That's what I'm doing with the job. It's why we need someone at Treasury who is not trying to grab headlines, rather someone who is diligent and thoughtful. I want to do this job. This is an important position. It's one I really care about. And when everyone is overwhelmed with the pace of change, with so many uncertainties, as we try to navigate these choppy waters, I think it is really important to have a steady person in this position with an eye on the horizon. That's why I want to keep doing this job. It's why I hope for your vote and why I appreciate this opportunity. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Goodman, your closing statement.
Thank you to the City Club and to you, John, for this night's event. It's been very enjoyable, as well as being very serious. The job involves competence, involves integrity, and it involves vision. Mr. Reed likes to take credit for other people's work. The Investment Management Act, which helped reduce the cost, was thanks to Treasurer Wheeler. The Oregon Saves program was again thanks to Treasurer Wheeler. With regards to grabbing headlines or grandstanding, Mr. Reed is the same person who spent $200,000 to get a new logo for the treasurer's office or spent $250,000 on a video advertising a mandatory program Oregon Saves, with him in what I consider a terrible cowboy outfit with the program. That was not needed. Those dollars could have been used much more effectively. You want to demonstrate competence, you want to demonstrate integrity, and you want to demonstrate vision. I've talked about this on many occasions. Competence is demonstrated by results and by communicating and letting people know about it to inform and persuade. As I think President Lincoln said, without the support of the population, you have nothing. Integrity. I do not want to be governor. Mr. Reed's been running for governor since the day he took office in the state legislature. And vision, serving all Oregonians, not just simply the chosen few or the chosen few attorneys from back east supplying funds to the campaign. I've enjoyed the campaign. I've learned a lot as I've traveled throughout the state, meeting so many wonderful people. Indeed, just my most recent trip, I met the great-great-great-grandson of President John Adams. What a wonderful young country that we are. And I have the support of people. Today I received in the mail a $5 money order from a person who I probably had to go to Fred Meyer's to get it done and get it mailed to me. Those are the kind of people that I want to represent, all the people of Oregon, as your next treasurer.
All right, thank you. That concludes our candidate debate. Special thanks to Treasurer Tobias Reed and his challenger, Jeff Goodman, for being with us, answering our questions, taking a few shots at each other, but generally keeping this a civil and enlightening conversation, which is all too rare, sadly, in the public domain these days. Thank you all to City Club for the opportunity to moderate tonight's debate. It was fun. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Honor Alexander Hamilton and don't throw away your shot. Get informed, get your ballot mailed, and please stay engaged after November 3rd. Thanks to everyone. See you next year.
Thanks very much.
Thank
you.